I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the jewelry box. Why was it so light? Why was the velvet lining empty, except for one folded envelope? And why did my phone buzz at that exact second with a message from my mother that read, "I had to sell them. Your brother needed help"? Those weren't just pieces of jewelry. They were the last things my dad gave me before he died. Attached to her message was a blurry photo of a pawn receipt. No store name, no full amount, just enough to tell me it was gone. My hands were still shaking when I opened the envelope she somehow hadn't found. Inside was a life insurance policy with my name listed as the only beneficiary, and the number printed at the bottom, it was 6 figures. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and what time it is there. I read every comment, and if you've ever been told something was for the family, I think you'll understand why I didn't call my mother back that night. I sat on the edge of my couch in my Chicago apartment, the empty jewelry box still open beside me, the insurance document spread across my lap like something I wasn't supposed to touch. I kept rereading the same line beneficiary Alice Reed, like it might disappear if I blinked too long. It hadn't just been jewelry. It was the last thing my dad had given me before he got sick. I remember the night clearly. I had just finished grad school, still figuring out how to build something stable in a city that didn't slow down for anyone. He handed me that small box at the kitchen table in our house in Ohio. Nothing dramatic, no speech, just a quiet, "These are yours." My mom had smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Back then, I didn't think much of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Because nothing in our family was ever just a gift. I've always been the responsible one. I'm a financial analyst. I work with numbers, projections, risk models, things that behave logically when people don't. I built my life in Chicago without asking my parents for help, paid off my own student loans, rented my own place, made decisions that made sense on paper even when they felt lonely in real life. Ethan was different. My younger brother had ideas, big ones, the kind that sounded impressive at dinner but never quite survived outside of it. He started a marketing company right after college, then pivoted, then rebranded, then borrowed money. My mom Diane called it supporting his potential. I called it covering losses. "Everyone needs a break, Alice," she used to say. "You've always been fine on your own." That was her logic. If I was stable, I didn't need help. If Ethan was struggling, he deserved more. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started small. Can you spot him a couple thousand just until his next client pays? Then it turned into, "I'll pay you back once things settle." Then eventually it became something we didn't even pretend to track anymore. The last time I transferred money to my mom's account was 2 years ago. I labeled it temporary. She never mentioned it again. Neither did I. The jewelry had been different. It wasn't money I could rationalize. It wasn't something I could replace with a spreadsheet or a new budget plan. It was mine, and my mother had sold it. Or at least that's what she wanted me to believe. I picked up my phone again, opened her message, and zoomed in on the photo she'd sent. The receipt was cut off at the edges. The total amount was partially blurred, like her thumb had slipped over the camera lens at just the right moment. No store name, no address. Just enough information to prove a transaction happened, but not enough to verify anything. That wasn't carelessness. That was control. I stared at it for a long time before doing the one thing that always grounds me. I looked for data. There are only so many pawn shops within a certain radius that deal in high-value jewelry, especially pieces like the ones my dad gave me, gold-certified stones, older craftsmanship. Not something you walk into any corner shop and unload without paperwork. I started with the closest locations to my mom's house in Ohio. Then I expanded outward. It took me less than an hour to narrow it down to 3 possible shops. I called the first one. Nothing. The second one didn't pick up. The third. Yeah, the man on the phone said slowly after I described one of the pieces. We saw something like that recently. My chest tightened. Do you have the seller's name? I asked. There was a pause. I could hear him typing. I can't give out full records, he said, but if you're the original owner, you can come in with ID. I'm not in Ohio, I said. Can you at least confirm if it was a woman? Mid-50s, another pause. Then, no, he said. Wasn't a woman. My grip on the phone tightened. It was a guy. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. For a second, I didn't say anything, because I already knew. Do you remember his name? I asked. He hesitated, then exhaled like he wasn't supposed to answer. Reed, he said. Ethan Reed. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I didn't feel shocked. That's the part that stayed with me later. I wasn't surprised. I was confirming something, like a number I'd already calculated finally appearing on screen. My mother hadn't sold my jewelry. She had just told me a version of the truth that would hurt less. Or maybe one she thought I'd accept more easily, because if she said Ethan did it, I would have asked questions. If she said she did it for the family, I was supposed to understand. I looked back at the insurance document still sitting on my lap. 6 figures. My name. My signature required. And suddenly, the jewelry didn't feel like the main story anymore. It felt like the beginning of something else. Something planned. Something that had already started moving without me. I opened my laptop, pulled up my banking dashboard, and started tracing every transfer I'd made in the past 3 years, every temporary payment, every unexplained request, every time I didn't ask for proof. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I was looking for a pattern. And 5 minutes in, I found one. I didn't sleep. Not because I was emotional. Not in the way people expect. I stayed up because something didn't add up and I couldn't ignore it anymore. By midnight, I had 3 years of my own bank activity pulled up across 2 screens. Transfers to my mom's account. Zelle payments labeled short-term help. A few checks I barely remembered writing. At the time, each one felt small, reasonable, but stacked together, it wasn't small. It was systematic. I opened a spreadsheet. That's how I think columns dates categories. I started logging every transfer tied to my mother or Ethan. The first thing I noticed wasn't the total. It was the timing. Every time Ethan's business had a dip based on what I could piece together from his public filings and what little information he shared, there was a corresponding request from my mom within days, sometimes hours. That wasn't coincidence. That was coordination. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the numbers. Then I pulled up something I hadn't planned to check yet. My credit monitoring alerts. I don't usually obsess over them. My score's stable. My accounts are clean. But there was one notification from about 6 weeks ago I hadn't thought much about at the time. A soft inquiry from an insurance company. The same company listed on my dad's policy. I clicked into the details. It wasn't a standard review. It was tied to a benefits access request. My stomach dropped. Because I hadn't requested anything, I picked up my phone and called the number listed on the policy document. It rang twice before someone answered. Policy services, how can I help you? I kept my voice steady. Hi, I'm calling about a life insurance policy under the name Michael Reed. I'm listed as the beneficiary. There was a pause while she pulled it up. Yes, Ms. Reed. I see that here. I need to confirm something I said. Has there been any recent activity on this policy? Another pause. Longer this time. I can confirm there was an access attempt, she said carefully. A request to initiate a partial withdrawal. My hand tightened around the phone. When approximately 6 weeks ago, that matched the credit alert. Was it approved? I asked. No, she said. The request was flagged because the signature didn't match our records. It was denied pending verification. I closed my eyes for a second. They had actually tried. Do you have a copy of the request? I asked. We can send it to the email on file, she said. Would you like that? Yes. I didn't hesitate. The email came through less than 2 minutes later. I opened the attachment immediately. There it was. My name typed neatly under beneficiary authorization. A scanned signature at the bottom. Supposedly mine. Except it wasn't. At a glance, it looked close enough, same general shape, same slant. But I know my signature. There are small habits you don't notice unless you're looking for them. The way I loop the A, the spacing between letters, the slight upward angle at the end. This one missed those details. It was a copy, not even a good one, and attached to the request was a bank account. Not mine. I zoomed in on the routing information. Then I froze, because I recognized the last 4 digits. I'd seen them earlier that night, on the pawn shop receipt, on Ethan's business account. For a second, everything went quiet. Not in the room, in me. All the emotion I should have felt, anger, hurt, betrayal, it didn't hit the way I expected. What I felt instead was clarity. They didn't just sell my jewelry. That was never the real goal. The jewelry was quick cash, low risk, easy to explain away. The insurance, that was the actual target. 6 figures accessible only with my authorization, or something close enough to pass. I scrolled back up to the top of the document and looked at the submission details. The contact email used for the request wasn't mine. It was a variation of my name, close enough that someone skimming might not notice, far enough that I'd never receive the confirmation. Careful, planned, and someone had assumed I wouldn't check. I picked up my phone again and dialed Ethan. This time he answered. Hey, he said, like nothing had happened, like we were still in that version of our relationship where I didn't ask questions. Did you sell my jewelry? I asked. Silence. Then a sigh. I was going to tell you, he said. When it was temporary, he added quickly. I needed liquidity. I was going to buy it back. You signed my name on a withdrawal request, I said. That stopped him. What are you talking about? I didn't respond right away. I wanted to hear what he'd say without knowing what I knew. I don't know anything about that, he said. Mom handled the paperwork stuff. Of course she did. Or at least that's the version he was sticking to. Ethan, I said, keeping my voice level, the bank account on that request is yours. Another silence. This one longer. Look, he said finally. His tone shifting. You weren't using the money. There it was. Not denial. Justification. It's not like you need it, he continued. You're doing fine. This would have helped me stabilize things. Pay people back. Fix everything. Fix everything. With my name. Without my consent. You forged my signature, I said. No, he started, then stopped. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't a version of this that sounded better out loud. I ended the call before he could try. I didn't need more explanation. I had enough. I looked back at the insurance document on my screen, then at the email, then at the spreadsheet of every transfer I'd ever made to support a system that had just tried to take something bigger without asking. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't even desperation. It was entitlement, and it had been building for years. I closed my laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair, because for the first time since I opened that empty jewelry box, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. And the next thing I did wasn't call my mother. It wasn't argue with Ethan. It wasn't even about getting the jewelry back. I opened a new tab and searched for a lawyer. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I was already at my desk. Same office, same skyline view, same inbox filling up with routine requests that suddenly felt irrelevant. I answered what I had to, moved a few deadlines, sent a message to my manager saying I'd be offline for part of the afternoon. Then I pulled up everything related to Ethan. Not emotionally, structurally. If there's one thing my job has taught me, it's this: people lie, but systems don't. Money leaves a trail, and if you follow it long enough, it tells you what someone was really trying to do. I started with his company. Ethan had rebranded it twice in the last year. That alone wasn't unusual. Startups pivot all the time. But the filings told a different story. Late vendor payments, outstanding short-term loans, a revolving credit line that kept getting extended but never reduced. And then I saw it. A payment 6 weeks ago. Same timing as the insurance access attempt. It was listed as a processing fee to a third-party financial service. But the amount didn't match any standard fee structure. It was too high, and more importantly, it was unnecessary. No legitimate reason for that payment existed unless someone was trying to move money through an intermediary, or prepare to. I leaned closer to the screen and cross-checked the routing details. Same bank, same institution listed on the forged insurance withdrawal request. This wasn't random. It was preparation. I texted Marcus. "Do you have time to look at something off the record?" He replied almost immediately. "Give me 20. Marcus worked in IT security. We weren't close in a personal sense, but we trusted each other professionally. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, and he didn't panic when something looked wrong. 20 minutes later, we were in a small conference room with the door closed. I walked him through it. Not everything. Just the pieces that mattered. The pawn shop. The insurance request. The bank account. He didn't interrupt. Didn't react. He just listened. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not dealing with one bad decision." "I know," I said. "This is layered," he continued. "Whoever set this up didn't just try once. They were building toward something." I nodded. "That's what it feels like." He tapped his pen against the table, thinking. "Can I see the email they used?" he asked. I pulled it up. He studied it for a second, then gave a short, quiet laugh. "They didn't even try that hard," he said. "What do you mean?" "This is a spoofed address," he explained. "Not hacked, not sophisticated, just close enough to pass a quick glance. But if the insurance company had processed it without checking the signature, they would have sent the money I finished. Yeah. To Ethan." Marcus didn't respond to that part. He didn't need to. "What about the payment his company made?" I asked, pulling up the transaction. Marcus leaned forward again. "That's not a normal vendor," he said after a moment. "It's a financial processor. The kind you use when you're expecting a transfer from somewhere else. Like insurance," I said. "Exactly." He looked at me then more directly. "You need to think about this carefully, Alice." "I am." "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I mean, legally." That word sat differently in the room. Legally. "This crosses into fraud," he said. "Forgery, attempted financial gain under false authorization. It's not just a family issue." I didn't answer right away, because that was the line I hadn't said out loud yet. Not to myself. Not to anyone. "Do you think he knows that I asked?" Marcus gave a small, almost tired smile. "People like your brother don't think in terms of consequences," he said. "They think in terms of access." Access. That word landed harder than I expected, because that's what this had always been about. Not need, not survival. Access. To my money, my stability, my name. After Marcus left, I stayed in that conference room a little longer, just sitting there, not moving, not calling anyone. Because now I understood something I hadn't fully let myself see before. The jewelry wasn't an emergency decision. It wasn't even about covering a debt. It was a test, a way to see how far they could go without resistance. If I had accepted that if I had just believed my mom's explanation and moved on, the next step would have been easier. The insurance request might have gone through the second time, or the third, and I would have found out after the money was already gone. I packed up my laptop and left the office early, not because I was overwhelmed, because I had enough information, enough clarity, enough proof. I didn't need to investigate anymore. I needed to act. Back in my apartment, I laid everything out on the table. The printed insurance document, the forged request, the pawn shop receipt, my transaction history. Each piece on its own looked explainable. Together they told one story, a complete one. I sat down, took a breath, and opened my laptop again. This time I wasn't searching for data. I was searching for someone who knew how to use it. A lawyer. Not just anyone. Someone who understood financial fraud. Someone who wouldn't treat this like a family misunderstanding. I read profiles, case histories, client reviews. Then I found one name that kept showing up in cases that felt similar. Daniel Carter, Chicago-based. Specialized in financial misconduct, fraud, and asset protection. I clicked on his firm's website and read through his background slowly. He didn't sound dramatic. He sounded precise, measured. The kind of person who wouldn't react emotionally, but wouldn't ignore what mattered either. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice. Carter and Associates, a voice answered. "Hi," I said. "I'd like to schedule a consultation." "Of course. What's this regarding?" I glanced at the document spread across my table, then back at the insurance policy. "It's about an attempted unauthorized withdrawal," I said, "and a forged signature." There was a brief pause. "Understood," she replied. "We can get you in this week." I hesitated for just a second, because I knew what this meant. Not in theory, in reality. Once I stepped into that office, this wouldn't stay private. It wouldn't stay contained. It would become something official, something that couldn't be undone. "Tomorrow," I said. "If possible." "We have an opening at 10 a.m., she said. "I'll take it." I ended the call and set my phone down slowly. For a moment, the apartment felt too quiet, too still. Like everything was waiting for what came next. I looked at the insurance document one more time, then at the name printed clearly at the top. Michael Reed, my father. The one person who had made sure something was mine. Not shared, not negotiated, not redistributed, mine. And now for the first time since he gave it to me, I understood why. Because somewhere he had already seen what I was only just beginning to accept. And tomorrow, I was going to find out how far this really went. Daniel Carter's office didn't feel intimidating. That surprised me. I had expected something colder, more rigid. But instead it was quiet in a controlled way, glass walls, clean lines, nothing unnecessary. The kind of place where everything had a purpose, even if you couldn't immediately see it. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Walk me through it," he said after a brief introduction, gesturing toward the folder I had brought. So I did. Not emotionally, not as a daughter or a sister, as someone presenting a case. I started with the jewelry, the pawn shop confirmation, the discrepancy in my mother's story. Then I moved to the insurance policy, the forged request, the bank account tied to Ethan's company, the timing, the pattern. Daniel didn't interrupt. He took notes occasionally, but mostly he listened the way Marcus had quiet-focused, connecting things in real time. When I finished, there was a short pause. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair. "Do you have a copy of the denied withdrawal request?" he asked. I slid the printed email across the desk. He studied it carefully. "Signature mismatch flag," he said almost to himself. "Good. That worked in your favor." "I didn't even know it was happening," I said. "That's usually the case with attempts like this," he replied. "Attempts." The word mattered, because it meant they hadn't succeeded. Not yet. "What are my options?" I asked. He looked up at me more directly. "There are a few paths," he said. "But before we talk about them, I want to be clear about something." He tapped the document lightly. "This is not a misunderstanding." I didn't react. I had already crossed that line in my head. This is an attempted unauthorized financial transaction using a forged signature, he continued. Legally, that falls under fraud, potentially multiple counts depending on how far it went. I nodded slowly. "And my mother?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "That depends on her level of involvement," he said carefully. "But based on what you've shown me, particularly the email behavior and the narrative she gave you, there's a reasonable argument that she was aware, if not directly involved." Aware. That word felt quieter than what it actually meant. Daniel turned his attention back to the insurance policy. "Your father structured this very specifically," he said. "Single beneficiary. Authorization required. No automatic access." "Why would he do that?" I asked. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the document. "Control," he said. "Or protection. From them." He didn't say it out loud, but we both understood. "So what happens next?" I asked. Daniel folded his hands together on the desk. "We can file a formal claim," he said. "Pursue legal action. That would involve reporting the attempted fraud, potentially triggering an investigation." I exhaled slowly. That was the path I had expected. But he added, "That's not your only option." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "There's a strategic step before that," he said. "Something that gives you leverage without escalating immediately." Leverage. That word felt different. Not reactive. Intentional. "A legal notice," he continued. "We formally document the incident, present the evidence, make it clear that you're aware of the attempt and prepared to pursue action if necessary. And if I do that, they respond," he said simply. "How?" "In one of 3 ways," he replied. "They deny everything. They attempt to negotiate. Or they admit enough to avoid escalation. And if they ignore it, then we move forward with filing," he said. "But by then we're doing it from a position of documented intent, which strengthens your case." I sat back slightly. This wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about choosing how the situation unfolded. "There's one more thing," Daniel said. I looked up. "You need to understand what this will cost," he continued. "Not financially, structurally." I waited. "If you send that notice, you're drawing a line," he said. "From that point on, this is no longer just a family matter. It becomes a legal boundary." "I know," I said quietly. "Do you?" he asked. Not challenging, just confirming. Because there was a difference. Knowing something intellectually and accepting what it would actually change. "They won't see you the same way," he said. "Your relationship with them will shift. Possibly permanently." I held his gaze. "It already has," I said. He nodded once. Then he reached for a blank sheet of paper and began outlining the next steps. "We'll draft the notice," he said. "Include the evidence pawn transaction insurance attempt signature discrepancy. Keep it factual, no emotional language." That made sense. Emotion could be dismissed. Documentation couldn't. "We'll also formally notify the insurance company that you're the sole authorized contact," he added. Lock down any further access attempts. Can they try again? I asked. They can, he said. But it will be harder and riskier for them. Riskier. For the first time, the balance felt different. Not completely, but enough. I left his office with a folder that looked heavier than when I arrived. Same documents, different meaning. On the train ride back, I didn't look at my phone, didn't check messages, didn't replay conversations. I just sat there watching the city move past the window because something had shifted. Not in them, in me. For years, I had operated under an unspoken rule. Keep the peace, be reasonable, don't escalate. And in return, I was expected to absorb whatever came my way, financially, emotionally, quietly. That rule didn't apply anymore. Back in my apartment, I placed the folder on the table and opened it again. The insurance policy, the forged request, the notes Daniel had written, clear, organized, actionable. I picked up my phone and saw 3 missed calls, all from my mother. A message followed. Alice, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. I stared at the screen for a second. Then I set the phone down without responding, because for the first time, I wasn't interested in talking. Not yet. Not until everything was in place. And as I turned back to the documents, one thought settled in steady and certain. They had already made their move. Now it was mine. I didn't answer my mother's calls. Not that day. Not the next. By the time Daniel's office sent me the first draft of the legal notice, I had already read it 3 times. It was exactly what he promised, cold, precise, impossible to misinterpret. No accusations, just facts, dates, transactions, the attempted withdrawal, the signature mismatch, and one sentence near the end that stayed with me longer than anything else. If any further unauthorized attempts are made, we are prepared to pursue full legal remedies, not emotional, not threatening, just final. I approved it without changes. The notice was sent electronically and by certified mail. Daniel told me we would likely hear something within 48 hours. He was right. It didn't even take 24. My phone rang just after 8 p.m. the next night. Diane. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Alice. What is this? She said. No greeting. No hesitation. Her voice wasn't angry yet. It was controlled. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I replied. The letter, she snapped. The legal notice. You had a lawyer send this to your own family. I leaned back against the couch. I had a lawyer document an attempted withdrawal using a forged signature, I said. Silence. Not confusion, not denial, just silence. Then you're overreacting, she said. There it was. The word I had heard my entire life. Overreacting. As if the problem wasn't what happened. It was my response to it. I don't think I am, I said. You always do this, she continued, her voice tightening. You take things too far. Ethan needed help. We were trying to figure things out. I asked. Another pause. That's not what this is about, she said quickly. You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be. I let that sit between us for a second. Because this was the pattern. Minimize. Redirect. Avoid. You sold my jewelry, I said calmly. Or at least you told me you did. That was to help your brother, she replied immediately. You weren't using it. And then someone tried to access my father's insurance policy using my name. I continued, not raising my voice, with a forged signature. Alice. The bank account listed on that request belongs to Ethan, I said. That stopped her, completely. No deflection this time. No immediate response. Just the sound of her breathing. I didn't know about that part, she said finally. It was softer now. Careful, measured. A different strategy. I closed my eyes for a second, because this was new. Not denial. Distance. That part. I see, I said. I thought he was just trying to stabilize things, she continued. He told me he was working something out with the insurance company, but I didn't know. You didn't ask, I interrupted. Alice, he's your brother, she said. I trusted him. I let out a quiet breath. And you didn't trust me enough to call me, I asked. That's not fair, she said quickly. You're always so controlled. You would have said no. There it was. Not need, not urgency, expectation. You're right, I said. That caught her off guard. I would have. The line went quiet again. Not tense, just different. Because for the first time, I wasn't arguing. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't trying to make her understand. I was just stating facts. Alice, she said after a moment, her tone shifting again, softer now, almost pleading. We can fix this. We don't need lawyers involved. I didn't respond right away, because I wanted to hear how she defined fix. Ethan is already under pressure, she continued. If this becomes something legal, it could ruin him. Ruin him. I looked down at the folder on my table, at the documents, at the signature that wasn't mine. He tried to take money that wasn't his, I said. I was trying to survive, she replied. He used my name. He didn't think you'd notice, I finished. She didn't answer, because that was the part she couldn't defend. I need you to listen to me, she said, her voice tightening again. This family has always taken care of each other. That's what we do. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, recognition. Because that sentence, that was the core of it. That was the rule I had been living under without ever agreeing to it. We take care of each other, which in practice had always meant I take care of them, and they decide how far that goes. That's not what happened here, I said quietly. Yes, it is, she insisted. Ethan needed help and you... No, I said, cutting her off gently. This time, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just stopped the pattern. That's not what happened, I repeated. There was a long pause, and for the first time in the conversation, she didn't fill it, because there was nothing left to reframe, nothing left to soften, only the truth sitting there between us. I'm not withdrawing the notice, I said. Her breath caught slightly. Alice? If there are no further attempts, this doesn't escalate, I continued, but that depends on what happens next. You're threatening your own family, she said. I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. No, I said. I'm setting a boundary. She didn't respond, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. But then she spoke again, quieter than before. You've changed, she said. I thought about that, about everything that had happened in the past week. The jewelry, the forged signature, the insurance, the lawyer, the notice, and I realized something. No, I said. I just stopped ignoring it. She didn't say goodbye when she hung up. Neither did I. The silence after the call felt different than before. Not empty, resolved. I set my phone down and looked at the documents one more time. Then I closed the folder. Because the next move wasn't about gathering evidence anymore. It was about what they chose to do with it. And whether they understood, this wasn't a situation they could talk their way out of. Not this time. The silence lasted 3 days. No calls, no messages, no attempt to argue, explain, or negotiate. That alone told me more than anything my mother had said on the phone, because Diane Reed had never been quiet when she believed she could still control the narrative. Silence meant they were thinking, or calculating. On the fourth morning, I got an email. Not from my mother. From Ethan. Subject line: "We need to fix this." I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and looked out the window at the street below. People moving, cars passing. Everything normal in a way that felt almost detached from what was happening in my life. Then I opened it. It wasn't long. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Things got out of control. I was trying to stabilize the business. I can pay it back once things settle. Let's not involve lawyers. We can handle this privately. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he had actually done. Just justification. And a promise tied to some undefined future where things settle. I read it twice. Then I closed it. An hour later, Daniel called. "We've received a response," he said. From Ethan, I asked. "And your mother?" he added. Separately. That surprised me. "What did she say?" "She's requesting a meeting," he said. "In person. No attorneys." I let out a quiet breath. Of course she was. Face-to-face had always been her strongest position. Emotion over structure. Pressure over clarity. "And Ethan," I asked. "He's asking to resolve this without escalation," Daniel said. He mentioned repayment but didn't provide any specifics. That tracked exactly with the email I had just read. "Do you recommend meeting them?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "Only under controlled conditions," he said. "And not alone." I figured. "If you go," he continued, "you don't go to negotiate feelings. You go to document behavior." I leaned back in my chair. Document behavior. Not repair relationships. Not find common ground. Just observe. "Would you be there?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Or someone from my office. But I'd advise we keep the structure clear. This isn't a family conversation anymore." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "I understand." The meeting was set for Saturday. Neutral location. A small conference room at Daniel's office. Not their house, not mine. Somewhere without history. I arrived 10 minutes early. Daniel was already there reviewing a printed version of the notice and the supporting documents. "They'll try to shift this emotionally," he said without looking up. "I know. They'll minimize intent," he added. "Frame it as desperation." "I know." He finally looked at me then. "And they'll expect you to bend," he said. I held his gaze. "I'm not here to bend." He gave a small nod. "Good." They arrived together. Diane first, then Ethan a step behind her. For a second, it almost felt like nothing had changed. Same posture, same dynamic. She walked in like she still had control of the room. He walked in like he was waiting for her to lead, but then she saw Daniel and the folder on the table, and something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. "Alice," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Mom." Ethan didn't speak. He just sat down across from me, avoiding direct eye contact. Daniel introduced himself, outlined the purpose of the meeting, and made it clear that everything discussed could be documented if necessary. No raised voices, no confrontation, just structure. "I think we've all had time to calm down," Diane began. I didn't respond. Daniel didn't either. So she continued. "This situation got out of hand," she said, "and I think we can resolve it without making it worse." "Define resolve," Daniel said. She hesitated, then looked at me. "Ethan can repay anything that was taken," she said. "Taken. Still not named. Still softened." "And the attempted withdrawal?" Daniel asked. "That didn't go through," she said quickly. "That wasn't the question," he replied. The room went quiet. Ethan shifted in his seat. "I made a mistake," he said finally. It was the first time he had said anything directly. I looked at him. "Be specific," I said. He swallowed. "I shouldn't have tried to access the policy without talking to you first, without talking to me first. Like the problem was the lack of conversation, not the act itself." "That's not what happened," I said calmly. He looked up just briefly. "I didn't forge anything," he added. "I had someone help me with the paperwork. There's a submitted document with a signature that is not hers." Daniel interrupted. "That constitutes forgery." Ethan didn't respond, because there wasn't a version of this that held up under precision. Diane leaned forward slightly. "This is exactly what I was worried about," she said. "Turning this into something legal is only going to make things worse." "For who?" I asked. She paused. "For all of us," she said. I nodded slowly. "That depends on what happens next," I said. Daniel slid a document across the table. "Here are the terms under which this matter remains civil," he said. Diane glanced at it. Ethan didn't move. "Full written acknowledgement of the attempted unauthorized access." Daniel continued. "Agreement to cease any and all attempts to access the policy. No further financial requests directed to Ms. Reed." Diane's expression tightened. "And if we don't agree to this?" she asked. "Then we proceed," he said simply. There it was. Clear. Binary. No room for interpretation. I watched them both carefully. Not what they said, how they reacted. Ethan looked at the document like it was heavier than it actually was. Because for him, it was. It wasn't just paper. It was accountability. Diane, on the other hand, she didn't look at the document. She looked at me, like she was trying to find something familiar, something she could still reach. "Alice," she said softly, "this isn't who you are." I held her gaze, and for a second I understood exactly what she meant. Not who I used to be. The one who would have folded. The one who would have said yes. The one who would have let this go. "You're right," I said. Then I nodded toward the document. "This is." Neither of them signed that day, but they didn't refuse either. They asked for time, which in itself was an answer, because for the first time, they didn't control how this ended. And as I stood up to leave, one thing was clear. This wasn't about fixing the past anymore. It was about defining what they were allowed to do going forward, and whether they understood that access to me, to anything connected to me, was no longer automatic. They took 2 days, not 1, not 3, exactly 2. That detail mattered more than I expected, because it told me this wasn't emotional hesitation, it was calculation. Daniel called me late Monday afternoon. "They've responded," he said. "I didn't ask how. I already knew it wouldn't be simple. They're willing to sign," he continued, "but with conditions." Of course they were. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. "A repayment plan," he said, "and a clause that avoids any admission of wrongdoing." I let that sit for a second. Repayment for what I asked. The jewelry, he said, and any prior financial transfers you choose to include. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. They were trying to reframe the situation into something smaller, contained, transactional. Like this had always just been about money. "And the attempted withdrawal?" I asked. "They want that excluded," Daniel said. Of course they did. Because that was the part that changed everything. "Can we do that?" I asked. "Legally," he said. "Yes. Strategically, I wouldn't recommend it." "Why?" Because the moment you remove that piece, he said, this stops being about attempted fraud and becomes a financial dispute. A dispute could be negotiated. Fraud couldn't. I leaned back in my chair thinking. "They're trying to protect him," I said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And possibly your mother as well." I nodded slowly. That tracked. This wasn't about resolution. It was about damage control. "What are my options?" I asked. "We respond with revised terms," he said. "Keep the acknowledgement. Keep the cessation clause. Remove nothing that affects your legal position, and if they refuse, then we escalate," he said. "Formally." There was no hesitation in his voice, no pressure either, just clarity. That night I sat at my kitchen table again, same place I had been a week ago, same documents in front of me. But everything felt different, because now this wasn't about discovering what happened. It was about deciding what mattered. I looked at the insurance policy. 6 figures, enough to change things. Not just financially, structurally. It wasn't just money, it was leverage. And for years I had used my stability to support them, quietly, without conditions, without boundaries. This was the first time I was using it to protect myself. I opened my laptop and drafted a response. Not emotional, not reactive, just clear. "We are willing to consider a structured repayment for the jewelry separate from the insurance matter. However, acknowledgement of the attempted unauthorized access and agreement to cease all future attempts are non-negotiable." I read it twice, then sent it to Daniel. He replied 10 minutes later, "Approved." The next morning, the revised terms were sent. And then nothing. Again. But this time the silence felt different. Not like they were thinking, like they were stuck. Because for the first time they were being asked to do something they couldn't reframe. Acknowledge. On Wednesday evening, my phone rang. "Ethan." I watched it for a moment before answering. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded different, lower, less certain. "Hi. I got the updated terms," he said. "I assumed you would." There was a pause. Then, "Do you really need that part in there?" he asked. "Which part?" We both knew. "Yes," I said. "It makes it look worse than it is," he said quickly. I didn't respond right away, because that sentence, that was the entire issue. Not what happened, how it looked. "It's accurate," I said. "Alice, you tried to access the policy without my authorization," I continued, "using a signature that isn't mine. I told you I had help with that," he said. "That doesn't change what it is." Silence. Then a sharp exhale. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with right now," he said. I closed my eyes for a second, because I did understand. I just didn't accept it as justification. "Then explain it," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "My accounts are frozen," he said finally. "Vendors are pulling out. If I don't stabilize things soon, the whole business collapses." I listened, not reacting, not interrupting. "I thought if I could access part of the insurance, I could buy time," he continued. "Just enough to fix things. Then I would have paid it back. Like that made the method irrelevant." "And when were you planning to tell me?" I asked. He didn't answer, because there wasn't a version of that plan that included me. "This doesn't have to go further," he said after a moment. "If you just remove that clause, we can settle everything." I leaned back in my chair. "You mean, if I make it easier for you?" "For you," I said. "No," he said quickly. "I mean, if you stop turning this into something legal." "It already is something legal," I replied. Another pause. Then quieter. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. I thought about that question, about everything behind it. The expectation, the history, the assumption that I would stop before it got uncomfortable. "Yes," I said. He didn't argue after that, didn't try to convince me, didn't shift the narrative. He just said, "Okay," and hung up. I sat there for a while after the call ended. Not because I was unsure, because I wasn't, but because something had settled in a way it hadn't before. Not just clarity, finality. They weren't trying to fix what happened. They were trying to control how it was defined. And I wasn't letting them. The signed document came in the next morning. No revisions, no conditions, just signatures. Diane Reed, Ethan Reed, both on the same page. Acknowledging the attempt, agreeing to cease any further access, accepting the boundary. I opened the file, read it once, then closed it. Because there was nothing left to negotiate, no more leverage to build, no more information to gather. Just consequences. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't waiting for what they would do next. I was deciding what I would. I didn't call them after they signed. That was the part I thought about the most. Not the confrontation, not the documents, not even the legal language that had finally forced everything into the open. It was the silence after. Because for most of my life, silence meant something was wrong. It meant tension, distance, something that needed to be fixed. But this silence felt different. It felt intentional. Daniel confirmed everything the same day. The agreement is valid, he said. They've acknowledged the attempted access, and they've committed to no further actions regarding the policy and the repayment I asked. That's separate, he said. They've agreed to a structured plan for the jewelry. We'll monitor compliance, but it's not tied to the insurance issue anymore. I nodded. 2 separate tracks. That mattered. Because for the first time, nothing was bundled together in a way that benefited them. Everything was defined, contained, controlled. I went back to work the next morning. Same office, same routine. But something in me had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed the difference in how I moved through the day. I wasn't checking my phone, wasn't anticipating another message, wasn't bracing for the next conversation, because there wasn't one. 3 days later, Diane called again. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hi. There was a pause on her end, not because she didn't know what to say, because she wasn't sure how to say it. We received the final confirmation, she said. I know. Another pause. I just wanted to talk, she added. I didn't respond right away, because I understood what that meant. Not legal, not structured, personal. About what I asked. Her voice softened slightly. This whole situation, she said, how it got to this point. I leaned back in my chair. Because that question had an answer, a clear one, but I wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. You want to understand, I said. Yes. I let the silence sit for a second. Then I spoke. You didn't think I would say no, I said. She inhaled quietly. That's not... You didn't think I would stop it, I continued. You thought I would adjust, like I always have. That's not fair, Alice, she said, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. It is, I said, still calm. You made decisions that involved my money, my name, and my assets without asking me. It was for the family, she said. There it was again, that phrase. But this time, it didn't land the same way. Then why wasn't I included, I asked. She didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that worked. I didn't realize how far it had gone, she said finally. I believed part of that, not all of it, but enough. That doesn't change what happened, I said. I know. Her voice was quieter now, less certain. I just thought you'd understand, she added. I looked down at my hands for a moment, because I did understand. I just didn't accept it. I do understand, I said, and that's why I didn't ignore it this time. There was a long pause. Then, "Are you cutting us off?" she asked. The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was practical, which made it harder, because it meant she was starting to see the structure of what had changed. "I'm not providing financial support anymore," I said. She exhaled slowly. "And everything else I thought about that. About what everything else actually meant. Access, expectations, the assumption that I would always be available. No more access to anything tied to me," I said, "financially or legally." She didn't argue, didn't push back, because the document they signed had already made that clear. This was just the personal version of the same boundary. "And us?" she asked quietly. I closed my eyes for a second, because that was the part no document could define. "We'll see," I said. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't final. It was just honest. After we hung up, I didn't feel relief. Not exactly. I felt something steadier, like the ground had shifted and I had finally adjusted my footing. A week later, Ethan sent his first repayment. On time. No message attached. Just a transfer with a reference number. I looked at it for a second before closing the notification, because the amount didn't matter as much as what it represented. Not apology, not repair. Accountability. Structured. Documented. Real. That night, I sat in my apartment with the insurance policy in front of me again. Same document, same number at the bottom. But it didn't feel like something under threat anymore. It felt settled, protected. Not because of luck. Not because they changed. Because I did. I folded the document carefully and placed it back into the envelope. The same one I found at the bottom of the jewelry box. The one they didn't see, or didn't understand. And as I set it down, one thought stayed with me. They didn't lose access because I took something from them. They lost it because I stopped giving it. It's been 6 months. Long enough for things to settle into something that doesn't feel temporary anymore. Long enough for patterns to either return or stop. In our case, they stopped. Not completely, but enough. Ethan made every payment, on time. No reminders. No messages attached. No attempts to restart the conversation in a way that shifted responsibility. Just transfers. Structured. Predictable. The way everything should have been from the beginning. I tracked them not because I didn't trust the process, but because I understood now that trust without structure was just exposure. And I wasn't interested in being exposed anymore. My mother called a few times in those first weeks. Short conversations, careful tone. No mention of the family as a reason for anything. That phrase disappeared. I noticed. I didn't point it out. Some changes don't need to be named to be real, but something else changed too. She started asking, not assuming, not deciding, just asking. It was subtle, but it was new. We saw each other once. A quiet lunch. Neutral ground again. No history attached to the space. She looked the same, spoke the same. But there was a hesitation in her now, not fear, awareness of where the line was and what it meant to cross it. We didn't talk about the insurance, or the legal notice, or the meeting. We talked about ordinary things, work, weather, small updates. And for the first time in years, it felt like a conversation between two adults. Not a negotiation. An expectation, just a conversation. I didn't offer anything beyond that. No financial help, no access, no opening that could be interpreted as a return to how things used to be, because I understood something clearly now. Boundaries don't work if they're temporary. They're not a reaction. They're a structure. As for me, I didn't just sit on the insurance, I used it, carefully, intentionally, not to fix anything that came from them, but to build something that belonged entirely to me. I put part of it into a long-term investment portfolio. Low risk, stable growth. The kind of structure I had always created for other people but never fully for myself. And with the rest, I made a decision I had been putting off for years. I bought a place, not because I needed to prove anything, not because I was trying to create distance, but because I wanted something that was mine in a way that couldn't be reinterpreted, not shared, not redistributed, not justified away. Mine. The first night I stayed there, the apartment felt too quiet. Not empty, just unfamiliar. I stood in the living room for a while, looking around at walls that didn't carry anyone else's expectations. No history, no assumptions, no one waiting for me to adjust. And I realized something. This wasn't about what I had lost. It was about what I finally stopped giving away. I still have the envelope, the one I found at the bottom of the jewelry box. It sits in a drawer now, not hidden, not protected, just there, because I don't need to guard it the same way anymore. What it represents isn't something they can reach. Not now. Not again. People ask sometimes carefully if things are better with my family. I don't answer that directly, because better isn't the right word. Clear is. Everything is clear now. What I'm responsible for, what I'm not. What I choose to give, and what I don't. I don't hate them. That's the part people expect. But this was never about revenge. It was about correction, about stepping out of a system that only worked if I stayed silent, and replacing it with something that actually held, something that didn't depend on guilt or obligation or history, just choice. The jewelry is gone. I've accepted that. Some things don't come back the way they were, but the value of it, what it stood for, or didn't disappear. It changed form. It became something more durable, something I can actually keep. And if there's one thing I understand now, it's this: access is not the same as love. And removing access doesn't mean you've lost something. Sometimes it's the first time you've actually kept it. There's a difference between revenge and boundaries, and I didn't understand it until I had to choose one. Revenge is reactive. It tries to balance the past. It focuses on what someone else did and how to make them feel it. Boundaries are different. They don't reach backward. They define what happens next. For a long time, I thought being a good daughter meant being available financially, emotionally, practically, no matter the cost. I told myself it was loyalty, that it was what family was supposed to look like. But loyalty without consent becomes expectation. And expectation, when it's never questioned, turns into entitlement. If you've ever been in that position where your stability became someone else's safety net without your permission, you know how quiet it can feel. Not dramatic, not explosive, just constant. What I learned is that you don't have to escalate to create change. You just have to stop participating in what doesn't respect you. That doesn't mean cutting people off completely. It doesn't mean holding on to anger. And it doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means being clear. Clear about what you allow. Clear about what you don't. And understanding that forgiveness doesn't automatically restore access. If this story felt familiar in any way, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And if you've ever had to set a boundary that changed a relationship, share what that looked like for you. This story is fictional and created for entertainment, education, and reflection, but the patterns behind it are very real. If you want more stories like this, you can follow along. There's always another perspective worth exploring.